The seller said, no, I only sell you the contiguous fences for properties. That little piece is not yours. And in this case, he made the seller give it back unless he could prove that it wasn't part of the original Ben Sisra holdings. And again, Rava challenges and says, but what about a Motzi Olav Araya? It should be the claimant. He wants it from you. So the Gemara picks up 7 lines from the top on Lamed that Kasha Rava al the Rava. Rava is inconsistent also. And Kasha the Rav Nachman ad the Rav Nachman. And Rav Nachman is inconsistent. Okay? So the Gemara answers that superficially it's contradictory, but if you examine the facts, it's not. The Rava Lokasha, it's not a contradiction. Hasam in the Bar Sisin case. Meicher Koi Benichse. The seller is still holding that little piece. Okay, Hacha Lokeach Koi Benichse. But in the first case, where the guy says, I had stuff in the basement or I was in a corner of the house, the buyer is the occupant of the property. The Rab Nachman Nami Lo Kasha. It's not a question for Rab Nachman either. Kaven da Omerle de Bei Bar Sisin. In the second case, where the deed says that Bar Sisin, all the Bar Sisin properties are being sold to Schwartz. So this little piece should, according to Rava, is part of that Bar Sisin holdings, even though it's not contiguous, and he should get it. Or Mikraya to Bay Bar Sisin. It's labeled, it's called the Bar Sisin property. So, and okay. And Lady Day Ramya Galuye. And so therefore it's up to the seller to prove that this is not part of the Bar Sisin estate. The Lav the Bay Bar Sisin here, it's not really part of Bar Sisin. Somehow people called it that, but it's really not. Aval Hacha, but in the first case, which is the guy said, yeah, but I kept part of the property. I was in the building. Lo Yehe Ella the Nikat Shtara. It would be equivalent to a story where the buyer says, but I have a contract, and the seller says it's not a valid contract. So the buyer would have to bring witnesses and prove up the contract. So that's how Reb Nachman paskined over there. Kayim Shtara v'kum b'nichse. The seller would say, well, you have to prove up the validity of your contract. Okay, new case. Now, this is a very interesting case. This is a case of somebody selling property more than once. Okay? Ahuda Amar Le Lechavre, so-and-so says to his buddy, my boys behind a besa, what are you doing in my house? Amar Le, the occupant says, Minach Zavante, you sold it to me. V'achalte shnei chazaka, and I've been here long enough to maintain a chazaka, to create a chazaka. So v'achalte shnei chazaka, and I've used it long enough to create a chazaka. Amarle b'shuke brei. I was out of town. I'm sorry, that's the next case. I was out of town. In other words, I was never here. So I couldn't have brought a claim during the 3 years because I was in Spain somewhere. And so the buyer, who's now the occupier, Omerle, says, Ha isli sahade, but I have witnesses that call shata have ist asis talsin yume, that you weren't out of town the whole 3 years. You came back every year for a whole month to get more inventory so you could go back to Spain and sell your Oriental rugs to the Moors in Spain. So Amalei, the original owner, replies, Talsa Yume, that whole 30-day period that I was back, Beshukai have to read. No, I was busy dealing with my business. I was acquiring more inventory, whatever it was.
Didn't have time to go
And I didn't, I never took a walk past that building. Nobody talked to me about it. I was so busy. I had no idea that you were occupying the property. So Rava Paskin, Avid Inishtakol Talsin Yumatorid Bishuka. It's reasonable to assume that on his brief visits home, it was only a month, he was so busy with his overseas business that he never had an opportunity. And therefore, you do not have a chazaka, because the presumption of a chazaka is that the previous owner had an opportunity and didn't. But here he didn't have an opportunity. Okay, new case. This is the two owners. Ahuda Amar Leilachavre, fella says to his buddy, my boys Pahayara, what are you doing on my farm? Amar Le Planyazivitna. I bought it from so-and-so. The Amar Zavantaminach, and so claimed he bought it from you, and presumably could prove that. So Amar Le, the challenger, says, At lavka maidis, do you not acknowledge, turn the page, Dahai Aradidihi, that this is my land? In other words, that I was the original owner of the land. Now that's critical, because by asking the third holder, the buyer, to acknowledge that he held it, that means he didn't have Adam to say he held it, or papers to say it was his. Okay? And didn't you buy it from someone who bought it from me? So Zil, get out of here. Lav bal devorim didiat. He says, the buyer says, get out of here. I'm not going, you're not my litigant. I didn't deal with you. I dealt with the intermediate seller. So Amar Rava claims, Dinaka Amarle, the challenger is right, that he bought it from Schwartz, not from Abramowitz. If anybody is going to claim he doesn't have a chazaka, it should be Schwartz. Abramowitz is not part of it. Yes. What?
Who is the one who said it?
Schwartz bought it from Abramowitz. Schwartz sold it to Cohen. Abramowitz comes and says to Cohen, you're not a legitimate occupier. I want my property back. Mr. Number one sold it allegedly to number two. Number two sold it to number three. Number one comes to number three and says, you're not a legitimate holder. Number three says to number one, you don't have standing to sue me. I dealt with number two. So get out of here. Don't bother me. And the court ruled that he was right, that if anybody wants to challenge him, it has to be number two. Now, that's in a normal case with normal human beings. Okay, we will see that's not always so. One person says to another, my boys, Bahai Ara, what are you doing on my farm? Amarle, the current occupant says, Milplanya Zivina, I bought it from so-and-so. V'achalte shnei chazaka, and I have been here for enough years to create a chazaka, so you don't have a claim against me. Amarle, the challenger says, Planya Gazalnahi, that in number 2, the intermediary is a known crook. Okay? And Amalei, and therefore your transaction with him is necessarily fraudulent. He's a crook. So number 3 says, yeah, but I was here in my house last night. I was entertaining some friends, and you came over. Ha Isle Sahade, I have witnesses. The Asi im Lachi Bach, that I went and visited you. I have witnesses that I checked it out with you. V'armatli zilzavin. And you said to me, yeah, that's a good piece of property. It's got a nice price. Go buy it. So you were murdered that the crook, alleged crook, held it legitimately and had a right to sell it to me. You advised me to go buy it. So now Amrele, the number 1 guy, says, Shani Naichili. Number 3, it says number 2, but number 3 is a nice guy. I can sue him in court. If he loses, he'll give it back to me. He's not going to shoot me. He's not going to beat up my kids. He's a normal human being. Arishan kasha himenu. But the number 2 guy, the intermediary, he's a mafia guy. He bribes judges. He beats up litigants. I can't take him on. So I wanted to make it easy for myself to get my property back, and I recommended you buy it so I could sue you. That's what he says. Okay, so what does the Rava do? Omer Rava, Dinaka Omerle. He's absolutely right. What he did was make it easier on himself to get it back. He could have never gotten it back from the mafia guy. And therefore, you have to return it to him. So come on. Now, this is a strange case. Because you can understand it's easy to argue the other way. You can shut your mouth. You can't tell me to buy it from a crook and then take it away from me. So come on, these are Amoraim. What Tana talks like that? Somebody named the Adman. Somebody named Adman. The Tanan, we have a Mishnah. That if somebody challenges ownership of a field, and he's actually signed a deed over to the mafia guy in this case, Admin Omer Hasheni Noyach Li Arishan Kosha Himenu, that the guy who signed the deed over to the bad guy can say I was coerced. And it's easier for me to sue the nice, normal human being who bought it in due course. But the majority opinion in that Mishnah says, Eved es zechuso, by signing the deed, he forfeited all rights to a claim. So now our problem is, how can Rava rule in favor of the original owner when it's only a minority opinion in that Mishnah? Okay, he can hold like Adman, but that's not the halacha. Rabim v'echad halacha karabim. So afilu tema rabbanan. You could say that in our case, we are holding like the rabbis. Hasem Aved Lemaisa. In the Mishnah's case, the Mishnah clearly states that the first guy, even though he was coerced, signed off. He made it a Maisa. He signed his name. Okay. Aval Hacha. But in the case over here where he simply said, yeah, go buy it, Dibura, that's just words. Avid Inish Mikre Aymar. People frequently say things that superficially seem to be against their best interest. So when he said, go buy it, the purchaser assumed he meant that he legitimately sold it and thought he was speaking against his interest. But what he was actually doing was being very clever and passing the buck so he could sue the other guy. Okay, new case. This is the case of the multiple sales. Hahuda Amr Leila Chavre, somebody says to his buddy, my Ispahayara, what are you doing on my farm? Amr Le, he replies, Milapanya Zivinte, I bought it from so and so. The Achalti Hashnechas Kasaka, and I've occupied it sufficiently long time to have established a chazaka. Amalei, the complainant says to the occupant, Plani Gazalnahi, that intermediary stole it from me and had no right to sell it to you. Amalei, the buyer, the current occupant says to the challenger, Ha Isle Sahade, I have witnesses that I was home at last night with some friends. Va'asis va'urta, and you came to me last night. Va'amartli zivna and nahali. And you came and you said, let's see if we can work it out where you sell it back to me. So you're admitting that you don't own it. You said, sell it back to me. So Amalei, the challenger, says, Amina, what actually happened was I said to myself, Asbun deny. I'll buy back what I really do own. So in other words, he tried to make a settlement so he didn't have to go to court. And if he can make a deal with the current holder where he actually, going to court takes time, takes money. If he can cut a deal and avoid going to court, that's a reasonable thing to do. Amar Rava says, Avid Inshid Zavin Dine. It is reasonable to assume that he was trying to make a deal with you, and that is not an acknowledgement that it's not his. When you make a deal in court, you neither admit or deny the allegations, but you'll never do it again. He didn't admit anything. Okay, next case. Hahuda Amar Leila Chavre, so and so says to somebody else, my Isla Hayara, what are you doing on my farm? Amar Le, he replies, Milafanya Zvina Vachalte Shnei Chazaka. I bought it from so and so, and I've been here long enough to establish a chazaka. Amar Le, the challenger, says, Vaha Kitina Shtara. I have a piece of paper. I actually have a deed. Dezamne Lemine, that I bought it from the intermediary thief guy, Hi Arashne, 4 years ago. And you're claiming a chazaka, which I'm assuming you mean 3 years. So I have paperwork to say I bought it first. And whatever you got that he cheated you. But your chazaka is meaningless. So Amalei, the current occupant, says, "Me, Savach, Shnei Chazaka." You think that when I said I have it long enough to establish a chazaka, I'm only saying I had it 3 years? No, Tal Shnei Amina. I only had it 3 years. Shnei Chazaka Tuva Amina. I had it a lot longer than 3 years. I was there before your deed. Your deed is fake. And it's my property legitimately. He sold it to me first. Now, Rava qualifies. Now, let's analyze this case. If he had a deed 4 years ago, and the new buyer bought it 5 years ago, he would not have had a chazaka. He only had it for a year. So the deed would trump the occupancy. So Rava says, I paskin it goes to the current occupant. Avide inshi dekoru shnei tuva shnei chazaka. First of all, I paskin that by using the phrase "I'm here long enough for a chazaka" is not saying it's only 3 years. It could have been 50. V'hani mili, and furthermore, the achla sheva, he had to have been there at least 7. So he had a chazaka before the fake deed. The kadim chazaka dahai shtara daha, that he had a chazaka prior to the claimant with the now believed to be fake deed. And aval shis, but if he had only been there 6 years or 5, less than 7, ein lacha macha gedola mizu. The guy with an actual piece of paper has a very strong claim, and the current occupant would have to prove up that he's been there for considerably longer, that he had a chazaka even before, and that number 2 never made a macha in the interim. And tune in tomorrow and we'll continue.
Okay, tune in, same station, same time.
No, it'll be about 5 minutes early. It's Friday.
Ah.
But that also